Hey everyone, back again with part 2 to my Yu-Gi-Oh! Horror Stories. And if you haven't seen part 1, feel free to check it out in the description or in the card at the top right corner. Feel free to also give it a like, comment, and share if you liked part 1, and feel free to do the same if you enjoyed this video. So let's get back into some horror stories. And if you thought my other stories were bad, prepare yourself for this next batch of stories. Things get a lot more heated and personal in this next few encounters. So without any further ado, let's get into it. So this story requires a bit of setup. So back in my early to mid-teen years, I mainly played Yu-Gi-Oh! With a friend that I met in karate, especially since he was one of the few people who I knew who played Yu-Gi-Oh! And he kinda coached me through the game, and he showed me how to really play the game in general. And one day we went with his group of friends at the same locals that I normally go to, and all is going well since I was cracking open a Duelist Pack 2009 Collector's Mini Tin, which had Stardust Dragon Assault mode on it, and one of the people in their group was also opening a tin, the same tin that I was opening. So this one kid sees the guy opening the tin, and the kid behind him asks what kind of tin he was opening, and he wanted to know where to buy it. And the guy in our group responded, "You should get out of the game if you don't know what kind of tin this is." And I was kinda shocked as to what I'd just seen and heard, since I had heard rumors of how rude and unpleasant some players can be in this game. And the very fabled rude player was right in front of me, and although he had been a bit of a jerk in some games that I had played against him in the past, I never thought he was this much of a jerk. And keep in mind, I was about 14 back then, and this guy was already a jerk to me, and here he was to this kid who looked a bit younger than I was. Maybe this kid looked around maybe 10 or 11, and he was getting chewed out by this guy who likely was in his early mid-20s. And I think he actually might have been 24. The comment instantly made the entire situation uncomfortable and awkward, especially since this was a kid and he was being rudely spoken to by this older guy. Luckily, the kid handled it very well, and he thanked the guy for the advice and walked away. And one of the other people in our group asked him why he spoke to the kid in such a rude way, and he said, "I work in customer service all day, and it gets tiring having to be nice to people all day. It just feels good being a dick after a long day." And I couldn't believe how much of a jerk this guy was being, to be honest. So much so that it kind of left me speechless. And I was just wondering how he could say that kind of stuff to that kid. And it almost reminded me of the scene where Kaiba first smack talks Joey in the first episode of the original anime, while they're in their whole card shop, or Yugi's grandpa's card shop. So, basically, I ran into the living stereotype of the rude Yu-Gi-Oh player. This guy even looked like the stereotype, and he certainly acted like it. Or as some people like to label these jerks as, neckbeards. And this experience has really stuck with me, since it's given me a bird's eye view into how these people operate on a daily basis. However, I like to think I was shocked, since people like this are few and far in between, and are not representative of the community as a whole, so I will say that. So don't be discouraged by these guys. These guys are not to be taken seriously. They're a few and vocal minority that may leave a bad taste in your mouth, but don't let them deter you. Luckily, the insults this guy also hurled at me didn't really bother me, since I'd adopted a words can't hurt me approach, but it was really disappointing to see this happen to another kid, and especially a kid, no less. So this next one. Oh man, do I remember this next one. This story is probably one of the most rage-filled scenarios that I've probably ever seen. So this horror story takes place at my locals, where everyone normally plays at the tables. And I'm sitting there with a friend, the same friend that I had mentioned before, and his entire extended friend group has tagged along too. And this was around 2010 when I just added the Shooting Star Dragon and Red Nova Dragon kind of cards to my Stardust Dragon Assault mode deck that I was normally building at the time. And I was also minding my own business, and I was kind of looking at my cards while everyone else was also playing with everyone else in the group. And out of the corner of my eye, I see this stern, mean-looking guy approaching the table. And he looks straight at me. He says, "Hey, you want a duel?" Though reluctant, I ultimately said yes since I was just sitting there and pretty much doing nothing. And keep in mind, I normally didn't play games outside of my friend group, or at least card games outside of my friend group, since I was pretty young at the time, and I kinda saw how unreasonably angry some players got. But what was I gonna say in this situation? No? So I ultimately decided to use my Stardust Dragon deck since I was working on how I could kind of test it out and I wanted to see how it performed. He then asked me what kind of deck I was using, and I told him I was using my Stardust Dragon deck, which he then seemed to kind of sarcastically mumble something underneath his breath, and he proceeded to get his stuff ready. And we started the game, and it's to no surprise that he was using a meta deck at the time, which were Black Wings. So a few rounds in, he was winning by a big margin, and he had smack-talked my deck the whole way through. Things were tough, but I had a potential strategy to get me out of the situation. Though this required me to hold on to a few cards, which meant that I had to take a few hits in the short run, so that I could ultimately win in the long run. So I slowly held on to the cards in my hand until I had 2 MSTs in my hand, along with the one I had set on the field. And since I was using the Flamebell engine, I had Rekindling in my hand, which could set me up for victory since I had all my Flamebells in the grave. I ultimately baited him out, and I managed to resolve Rekindling, which allowed me to Synchro Summon a Red Dragon Archfiend and 2 Stardust Dragons. But with the help of 1-for-1 and Double Summon, I was able to summon out Shooting Star Dragon, Red Nova Dragon, and Stardust Dragon Assault Mode. And because I had Pot of Avarice in hand, I was able to recycle 5 tuners back into the deck so that I could use Shooting Star Dragon's multiple attacks, which would get me out of plenty of jams in the future as well. And as my opponent was realizing what was happening, his initially stern face went from being cocky to disbelief, and it soon turned into anger as I proceeded to get rid of his back row with the MSTs I had saved up. And I was then able to attack 5 times with Shooting Star Dragon, since I had used Pot of Avarice to load my already thinned out deck with tuners, which meant I was able to KO him with Red Nova Dragon and Stardust Dragon Assault Mode. The guy had the greatest look of rage on his face, and he lost it after I'd land the finishing blow. And he had been holding onto the sides of the table in anger right before he then picked up both sides of the fold-up table as he stood, and he furiously flipped the table over, which sent everything flying. He further exploded and proceeded to cuss me out, which I kept a relatively calm look on my face as he flipped me off and he angrily walked away. He even stormed off so quickly that he didn't even bother to pick up his deck. I was barely taking in what had just happened, and I was more shocked than anything, since he had had such an unbelievable meltdown. However, I look back at this situation and I kind of find it hilarious, especially because of how ridiculously he reacted to his loss, and especially because he was smack-talking the whole way through. But man, that had to have been the angriest I had ever seen any player get, and I had never seen anything like that before. And it looked like he didn't even care about the cards he had left behind, especially since he never returned for them. But after security had helped put the table back up, I noticed a few people going over to the spot where he had left his cards, and they were basically collecting what they could from the wreckage. And it was even more hilarious since they looked like a bunch of pigeons gathering around a clump of breadcrumbs, which I guess kind of brightened the mood after that. But man, that had to have been one of the biggest freakout moments that I had ever seen. But apparently, my story is pretty tame compared to other people that I know. So much so that someone I know had told me their opponent had tried to throw their deck at them after they had lost the match. I'll never understand these freakouts, but we can laugh and learn from them at least. So yeah, that was part 2 to my Yu-Gi-Oh! Horror Stories. And I know that these are not the worst stories that have ever been told, but I wanted to share them to kind of shed some light that other people may be going through these similar type of scenarios, which may be relatable to some. But let me know in the comment section how relatable some of these stories are. I'm interested to know what your experiences have been. But with that pretty much wraps it up for this video. If you would like to support more content like this in the future, you can do so at my Necromancer1040 Patreon link down below. I normally post it in the description, and you can check it there along with the other cool things I normally post down below. And with that, thank you so much for watching, thank you so much for your support, and I'll catch you in the next one. Alright, take care.